Hey guys, Wyatt Claypool here. Today on the show, we're going to be talking about BC provincial fundraising numbers, and if that seems oddly specific to you, hold up for just a second. It will tell a story about how BC provincial politics are going in general. So, as you may know, in October of 2024, the BC NDP narrowly were re-elected to a majority government, just winning 47 seats. The Conservatives, who used to have 0 seats in the last election, were able to get 44 seats, and the Greens just have 2, which is pretty much all the Greens can really ever hope for because it is just the more radical and more progressive version of the BC NDP, who was already extremely radical even compared to the federal NDP. But I digress. I'm going to break down for you guys what the parties were able to fundraise in quarter 1 and quarter 2 and explain why we are seeing the shift happen. Of course, I do work for the new party, One BC, which is a breakoff of the BC Conservatives after John Rustad kicked Dallas Brody out of the party, and Tara Armstrong and Jordan Keeley ended up also leaving. Tara Armstrong then joining with Dallas Brody to start One BC, which we will get into in a bit. Of course, I would always recommend you go check out the One BC website that I will have linked in the description below, as well as pinned at the top of the comments. But without further ado, now we will now get into the numbers of how the different parties are doing on fundraising. We will start off with quarter 1 for each of the parties. I will write it in blue. I did not put the BC Conservative Party's name in blue for a reason, which we will be getting into. And so in quarter 1, we had the BC NDP raise $802,000. This is the first full quarter after they had won re-election. Of course, the fourth quarter of 2024 is when the election had taken place in BC. And of course, a lot of the parties tend to do a lot of their fundraising earlier in the year, trying to build up a war chest. But that's not too bad. Of course, they're back in the government, and usually that means that your fundraising is going to look pretty good. Let me move my microphone over just so that I'm not turning away from it constantly. But that was their first quarter numbers. And the BC Conservatives actually had some pretty good fundraising in the first quarter of 2025. They had $723,000 that they brought in. And then we had the BC Greens bring in $210,000. Right now, they are in the middle of a leadership race in order to replace Sonia Furstenau. They have an interim leader right now who isn't running for the leadership, and not even their other MLA isn't even running for the leadership. It's very strange. But that is quarter 1 fundraising. Not bad for the Conservatives considering that they did lose the election, but their fundraising is keeping pace with the NDP. Now, let's move on to Q2. Now, let's start from the BC Greens. The BC Greens were actually able to keep pretty consistent fundraising, getting $200,000 in money in the second quarter of 2025. Then we have the BC NDP dropping a bit down to $700,000 in quarter 2. And now this is where it gets not great. The BC Conservatives, after raising $723,000 in the first quarter of 2025 fundraising, were able to only bring in $350,000. In fact, when you actually run the numbers past the hundreds of thousands of dollars and you go down to the hundreds, the BC Conservatives, in fact, brought in less than half of what the BC NDP brought in. And you will notice that they are now much closer to the BC Greens, the BC Greens having raised more than half of what the BC Conservatives ended up bringing in. Now, why is this? Why is this? If you're opposing the BC NDP, you think it would be very easy to raise money. The BC NDP are terrible. The condition of British Columbia right now is awful. It should be easy to bring in money, correcting for the fact that some people may be so broke at this point that they can't afford to do so. But this is pathetic numbers. I need to just quickly calculate how much of a drop is this. They ended up, and by the way, in the second quarter of 2024, leading up to the election, and I know it was an election year, but they brought in like $1.1 million in that quarter. And now this year, they're bringing in $350,000 with 41 MLAs who can presumably travel around and fundraise for the party. So they ended up bringing in 48%. This is 48% of what they brought in the first quarter. They had a massive, massive drop. This is pathetic. The Greens barely had a drop, and yes, the BC NDP had a drop of 100,000, but they also still brought in $700,000. And now I want to show you something that kind of highlights why a lot of people don't really want to donate anymore to the BC Conservatives. I'll just quickly bring this up on screen. It has to do with things that people like the executive director of the party have been saying, effectively indicating the party no longer really cares about opposing things like SOGI and DRIPA. This first clip is going to be about DRIPA, and then I want to move over to SOGI. If you don't know it, SOGI is, or DRIPA is, the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, which is the BC legislature's imposed version of UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. And on this podcast, Mo Amir's podcast, Van Colors, on Czech News, the executive director of the BC Conservative Party, Angelo Isidoro, went on to talk about what people like Dallas Brody, Jordan Keeley, and Tara Armstrong are getting wrong about how politics is supposed to go. This is a clip I made myself. It's 2 minutes, but sit through it and you will be enlightened by why people are not really confident anymore with the BC Conservatives.
Part of what I didn't like about the BC Liberals and sort of the modern left is this notion of I like something or I don't like something, therefore you should not be allowed to like that thing, right?
Right, okay. Like
And
the purity culture.
The purity culture. Yeah. And I think what we're witnessing is some of that purity culture also emanating from the right, which it's done before, right? Yeah. I go back to like Harry Potter books being burned in the early 2000s. And I think that, there are folks who didn't understand that the excitement of I get to vote for whatever I want also means that your colleague gets to vote for whatever they want, and you might not agree with that. And how do you handle yourself at that reality, right? How do you handle the reality that you don't like DRIPA, but there's another colleague in your caucus who does, and part of the beauty of what's been built is you can have your opinion, you can vote however you want, and they can vote however they want, as long as you agree on like the sacred cows.
Right.
And I think what we've seen is this
repealing DRIPA is not a sacred cow for the Conservative Party.
Well, I think that it's in our platform. Like
that's what I mean. That's what I'm asking. But so is it a sacred cow or it's not?
I think it's for the leader to say. Like it's in the.
I love this clip. Now, I don't agree with much of what Mo Amir says on politics. He's openly very socialistic, very progressive. He openly calls himself woke. But me and Mo Amir can at least get along in the fact that neither of us like to beat around the bush and just talk in corporate political speak. Angelo Isidoro here really needs some PR training. Do you know what that man just did? He just admitted that the party doesn't actually believe in repealing DRIPA, because he just referenced it as something that people like Dallas, Jordan, and Tara need to get over if their colleagues don't want to vote to repeal it. And then he admits it's part of the platform. And then when Mo, I love this clip because Mo's laughing because you can tell he's like, isn't that part of your platform? Why is this being referenced as something that a free vote would happen on? And then when he says, is that a part of the platform? Or do you have to vote for it? Is this a sacred cow? Angelo can't even say yes. He can't even say yes. And I've seen so many BC Conservative people who know better, coming out and saying, well, of course we oppose DRIPA, but we also need to pursue real economic reconciliation, and we can't be opposing that. And the thing is that, yes, they oppose DRIPA. Some of them will say they oppose DRIPA. Others like Alia Warbus and Eleanor Sturko and Scott McInnes and Peter Millibar and people like that, they won't say they're against it because they're in favor of it. But even the ones who are against it will say, but, of course we still want to follow the guidelines laid out in UNDRIP. It's like UNDRIP is worse. DRIPA is like 80% strength version of UNDRIP. And now you're like, okay, we'll repeal it, which I don't believe you will. If you put it up for a free vote, okay, let's put it this way, guys. If 10%, or let's say one fifth of people in caucus, or even 10%, of caucus does not like, you need 47 seats for a majority in British Columbia politics. How, if you lose any people trying to repeal DRIPA and you only have 47 seats, you cannot repeal it. And now let's think, if you had, how many people, if you had a fifth of your MLAs who are in favor of DRIPA, that would mean if you got even 50 seats, you couldn't do it because you would only have 40 voting to get rid of it. You would need like, how many? You would need like 59 or 60 MLAs before you could actually reliably get rid of DRIPA if you allowed that to be a free vote. And Angelo said, well, John is apparently is going to tell us whether or not it's up for a free vote or not. How don't you know, as the executive director of the party, how is the fat salary doing for you, Angelo, by the way? How do you not know, as the executive director of the party, what the flippin' leader thinks about DRIPA, if he's going to make it a free vote or not? You don't know that? Now, let's get to another issue. And that is SOGI. One of the two MLAs I work with at 1BC, I work the legislature with 1BC. Full disclosure, my salary is a massive $25,000 a year. I get paid like minimum wage part time, because the point is not for me to make money. I in fact make only $25,000 a year as a personal choice because I don't like people working at the legislature who I know are making over $150,000, who are making over $200,000 a year, and I know they don't do a thing. They're utterly worthless, and in fact, they advocate for policies, they advocate for weakness, where BC Conservative members demanded that they be strong. But here is something that Tara Armstrong pointed out about the current BC Conservatives' policy on SOGI. So Mandeep Dhaliwal, who is a BC Conservative MLA in Surrey, says, introducing the Parental Transparency and Age-Appropriate Education Act. As a critic for parental rights, I am proud to announce the introduction of a new bill titled the Parental Transparency and Age-Appropriate Education Act. And it goes on to explain what it's all about, but Tara Armstrong read the bill, and by the way, guys, this supposedly anti-SOGI bill does not actually oppose SOGI. As Tara said back during the last session, she said, during the campaign, John Rustad promised to get rid of SOGI. What does his parental bill actually offer? Another mushy letdown? All the bill would do is set up committees to discuss whether school materials are age appropriate. It doesn't even mention gender ideology. It does nothing to address schools concealing gender transitions from parents, schools allowing boys into girls' bathrooms, schools indoctrinating kids with trans ideology in GSAs and pride clubs, school counselors encouraging kids to socially transition with new pronouns or to chemically transition with puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. Parents want this garbage to stop. Why doesn't John Rustad? Maybe he does, but there are consequences to making trans rights activists like Eleanor Sturko and Alia Warbus, who are two BC Conservative MLAs, by the way. Warbus actually made a documentary on someone having a gender transition as a very big positive. But she says, but there are consequences to making trans rights activists like Eleanor Sturko and Alia Warbus your de facto leaders in caucus. It means it's a private member's bill that is never going to get passed, and they still couldn't even pretend to fight back against against gender madness. How tragic that the largest opposition caucus in BC history found itself with such a weak, woke leadership. So yeah, this is why, guys, this is why we are seeing a drop-off like that. They only raised 48% of what they raised in quarter one and quarter two. At the same time, let's run the numbers for the NDP. The NDP, a party that is awful, by the way, I hate the NDP. The NDP was able to bring in 87%. This is 87% of what they raised in the first quarter. They're getting in the second quarter, which is usually a more sluggish quarter. They only had a 13% drop off. The BC Greens, what was their drop off? I don't even think that's like 5% drop off. Yeah, they only had, this is 95% of their quarter one fundraising that they got. And the BC Conservatives, by the way, I'm actually going to have to pause this so I can erase all this stuff to talk a little bit more about some other fundraising things. But I'm going to get to the current finances of the BC Conservative Party. And this is all public. So right now, the BC Conservatives do not have any money in the bank. In fact, they have negative amounts of money in the bank. So the CPBC, how much do they currently have in the bank? Well, technically, they have a little bit more than 500,000 cash on hand. But that is counterbalanced by the fact that they have over 5 million in debt, current liabilities and long-term liabilities. And if you actually take off the cash in hand off of the current debt, you still end up with, you get $4.5 million in debt. These are negative numbers. They do not have this money. So when they only raise $350,000 in the second quarter of 2025, only raising 700,000 in the first quarter, which was pretty good fundraising, they are quite literally not even putting a dent in the debt. They do get a per vote subsidy, which is, I believe, like around $1.80 per vote, and they got like 991,000 votes or something like that. So per year, they get $1.6 million from taxpayers. By the way, one BC would love to get rid of per vote subsidies because it's a stupid policy that makes taxpayers fundraise for parties that are oftentimes unpopular, but the taxpayer doesn't get to say, hey, you guys are not meeting the commitments you guys promised us, so why should we have to keep transferring you 1.6 million a year? We'd love to get rid of stuff like that. But right now, we have, with the BC Conservatives, they're getting 1.6 million a year, but if they are currently $4.5 million in debt, even if you applied $1.6 million to it per year, it would still take, I'm still bad at math, so I'm going to calculate this, it will still take them 2.8 years to pay it off. And if you think these guys don't still have fat salaries and have a lot of fundraising or sort of advertising commitments and other sorts of things, email servers, data sites that they have to pay money to in order to keep all their data there, these guys are not even denting the debt in the year 2025. And now they're running this leadership review where like 50 people in all of Surrey will show up to vote on whether they not want John Rustad to stay. Oddly enough, now John Rustad, during his own leadership review, really cares about election integrity. During the BC Conservative AGM, he and his allies literally rigged the AGM in order to make sure that the people who actually wanted transparency, accountability, and real conservatism wouldn't win. They literally bust in 100 guys just to vote down ballot on anything that John Rustad wanted. Utterly pathetic. But now he has tight security so that the same idiots that he employed in order to rig the AGM don't come and rig his own leadership review against him. Because, guys, by the way, there are like 5 or 6 MLA candidates or MLAs who currently want to replace Rustad because although they say they like Rustad, they think he's an idiot. I've talked to these people. They all know who's running. They all think John's weak. You have people like Eleanor Sturko who wants to be leader. Gavin Dew wants to be leader. He just put out this weird op-ed where he was talking about like how the conservatives need to not be so conservative because, real conservatism is not doing anything whenever, real conservatism is apparently maintaining institutions that the NDP creates because, maybe voters won't like us so much if we don't, do exactly what the NDP wanted. We might freak out voters if we actually say what we want to do. I'm trying to find this. I don't have it for you guys today, but Gavin Dew posted some endorsement of Kamala Harris during the 2024 election because he's a big Kamala Harris fan. Actually, no, it wasn't even during the 2024 election. He was actually, oh my goodness, this is blowing my mind. Gavin Dew was actually a 2020 Democratic primary Kamala Harris fan. That's embarrassing. But the people who want to take over for John are Eleanor Sturko, Gavin Dew, Harman Bangu, who can't even survive a friendly interview without falling all over himself. Bruce Banman wants to take over, and then we also know that a dark horse candidate might also be Peter Milobar, and then some other people. I think this might be someone I'm also missing in there, but it doesn't really matter. A lot of these individuals are just not very good. But that should be it for this video, guys. Hopefully you don't mind this being shown to you. This is very nitty-gritty, but I think it is also it's something that people need to understand. The numbers, the fundraising numbers do affect the parties. It does affect the electoral viability. This is why I'm helping out 1BC now. One, I don't like screwing over the members of a party and pretending that rigging an AGM is okay. I don't like executives in the party getting a $177,000 bonus after losing the election. Two people, to my knowledge, got a $177,000 bonus post-election. I don't like wasting money on bad consultants, on bad advertising firms, on bad vendors during an election that we easily could have won. And that's why I'm helping out BC 1BC. So check out 1bc.ca in the description at the top, the links. Again, we actually have money, cash on hand, and we actually don't have a massive debt. So if you stick around with these guys, you are going to have to pay off $4.5 million. By the way, do you know how much money the BC NDP has? They have $4 million without any debt. They have this much money without having to pay off anything to get it first. The Conservatives have $500,000 on hand, but even if I take it out of the debt, they still have the $4.5 million in debt. So I would say if you're a British Columbian, encourage your MLA, if you have a BC Conservative, to join 1BC, because then they actually may have a hope in heck to actually get reelected, because they won't have they'll have more than $5 in the bank, and they'll actually be able to talk about policies that matter. They won't be talking about slight reforms to SOGI. They won't be too cowardly to talk about DRIPA. They will actually want to reform the healthcare system rather than just pointing at, oh my goodness, look, it's a 14-hour wait at the Mission Hospital. That's bad. What are you guys going to do about it? And every time I see a BC Conservative MLA, and it's not their fault, a lot of these people are great, but a lot of BC Conservative MLAs will just look at how many hours of a wait time it is, but they won't actually say we need to slash bureaucratic spending and shift it to the front lines, because that might be controversial, so let's just keep pointing out the problem without actually pitching a solution. 1BC has solutions. My goodness, it's not that hard to do politics, but I guess it's hard if you're John or Angelo or Azim Jawani. Then you actually have to put some thought into it. Angelo Isidoro, by the way, a guy who's now criticizing things that Dallas and Tara are saying, that they're being too pushy about their views on policy. Dallas Brody is somehow racist for having criticisms of the reconciliation industry. Didn't Angelo used to run the UBC Free Speech Club? What a way to fall down in your career, my goodness. But I guess he has the money that it makes it all worth it. But whatever. That's it for this video, guys. Probably more BC political rants in the future. Hopefully you liked this. And I will see you guys in my next video. Check out the 1BC website. See you guys later.